been a year since the tragic passing of George Floyd, which sparked protests all over the world in efforts to improve diversity. But has this changed the sports world?
We were in the middle of a global pandemic, so the world slowed down for everyone. You're kind of in your house and you're consuming everything. Of course, George Floyd incident happened, RIP, in America, and that kick fueled the biggest civil rights movement we've ever seen before. And I feel like because people were inside, you kind of consumed everything on a deeper spiritual level almost, because it's right in front of you. You can't just gloss over it by going outside. Everyone's indoors, everyone has to take this in. I feel that what that then does is it means that everyone's watching, everyone's paying attention, right? Therefore, if everyone's so switched onto it, you're hopefully regaining more information and having conversations about things, because there's nothing else discussed at the moment. So people are having the uncomfortable conversations. People are saying, what can I do? I can't change the world, but what can I do within my community, with my soul circle? I feel like what happened was, especially if we take the knee, for example, when it kind of was just done without kind of the unison or the agreement of how it's done now. I feel initially what it was a call that, you know what, more needs to be done, action needs to be done. And because people were seeing this every week, people are like, hold on, why is this still going on? And then you would have that uncomfortable conversation. It's going on because X, Y, and Z hasn't been addressed. Racism in society hasn't been addressed. Racism in football hasn't been addressed. Stereotypes, credences, all these things have not been addressed. I feel like what's happened is that's been helpful, but anytime you make a call for action, action then has to come. In my recent piece, I related it to, imagine you call someone because you need something. And the first time you call, it goes to voicemail. And you're like, okay, you know what, I'll call back later. You call back later, goes to voicemail again. You're thinking, okay. You call again, the ringtone's cutting you. You're like, hold on, I just need to ask for something. For like, we need something to get done. You keep calling, you keep calling. And after a while, you're thinking, hold on, why am I even calling anymore if this phone call is not going to get picked up? I feel that's where we are now with all of this ongoing activity, where everything that's been done has been done out of good measure, whether it was the knee, whether it was kind of when the Greens take the knee, the Premier League saying that everyone's taking the knee, everything was done out of good measure. But there's no point having calls for action if we're not seeing real action, because we've been here before. This is not a fight that started this year. Footballers way older, generations way older, have been saying things for time and time again. Everyone's been making these phone calls for action, but we're still not seeing the action we want to see. We don't want to see, oh, okay, your DMs were banned for 5 minutes. That's not enough. It's almost like we know what needs to be done in terms of making examples of people, therefore that can stop, but that's not happening. And therefore, I feel that's why we're in the moment where we then not questioning, has it been effective? Is it doing what it needs to do?
I think the fundamental thing to note is that these things take time. If you think of slavery lasted for how many hundreds of years, and how many years are we post that, and how many years are we post independence, and how many years are we post Windrush? Like, these things take, the fact that they took time to be ingrained, and they'll take time to dismantle, and also to understand that it's generational as well. Like, the problem that we have is that the people that are in positions of power, and this whole thing is about power, is that they are people in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They are completely different generation. And I don't want to generalize, but some people are not open to opening their minds. It's like, well, this is what I've always thought, so this is how I'm going to behave, and I'm in the position of power. I think when we talk about racism, it is about power, and it's about the reason why this is my kind of thinking. And also my dad, we'll talk about this a lot of my dad, and he's just very much like, well, once you understand that it's about power, and the key thing about power is keeping power. Now, the analogy that we always use is that if you're on a train for 14 hours and you have a seat, would you give up your seat for the person over there that needs the seat? Like, are you going to give up your seat? And if the answer is no, it's a similar thing. How I see it is that in order to eradicate racism and this kind of behavior, white people have to give up the power. Like, yeah, you're not going to be above everyone. You're not going to have this automatic advantage over everyone. And are people willing to do that? I mean, that answers it. And when I start to think of it like that, you realize that, okay, so things will change, but they won't change at the speeds that you'd necessarily expect.
According to the National Council for Training Journalists Diversity Report in 2017, only 1% of journalists are identified as black. Add that to the fact that only 2 BLM journalists went to Euro 2016 and that there's never been a black sports editor at any mainstream newspaper. So, how does this affect how black sports people are perceived, and what is it like being a black person in this space?
Probably when I came into the industry, there was, Darren Lewis and Rodney Hines, who I would kind of refer to as, pioneering black sports journalists. Both people who haven't had a professional career on the field of play and have come through in the same way that I have to got their jobs. So I'd say, I don't want to be down on it because I've had an incredible time in the sports media. It's a great industry. You do some wonderful things, and I feel very blessed to be part of the industry. But I would say, in summary, it can be quite lonely.
I feel that in terms of, let's say, black footballers and speaking to black platforms or people that they can relate to, it's so important because you then understand their personality a bit more. You can kind of understand that this is more than an athlete, more than a footballer. This is a human being, because there's that relatability there. They don't, a lot of the times with experiences I've seen or been with, they don't feel like they're being quizzed, or they don't feel like it's solely about the game. It's literally a conversation like you're having with one of your friends. Don't get me wrong, you can have that with anyone, but sometimes you feel a bit more comfortable, especially when you've been in a space that is heavily white, to then have someone that's something different, a breath of fresh air. It feels relatable. So for me, it's quite important, especially the Carlton Cole one. This was Carlton Cole speaking about events that happened 10 years ago. But because he was with people that it was relatable and it was a conversation and it wasn't like an interrogation or quizzing, he spoke really well on really key topics. And from there, conversations have then pushed forward. So I feel like it is important that these footballers can feel like they have a safe space, because I can't imagine how it feels kind of being in an environment where you feel like people don't understand you. You feel like people don't want to understand the real you. They're actually kind of quizzing you just purely based on your career, which is, what comes with the nature sometimes, or the territory. But that person's a human being. That person wants to talk about other things. That person has a story. Can you relate to that story? Can that person's story come out? Can they actually discuss things, from a real personal place? Sometimes you need that comfort to be able to do that.
Ultimately, I feel like people want to be judged as a good journalist rather than by your color or by your race. I'm sorry, same thing, or your age or your class. Like, you just want to be judged as, I'm a good journalist for this job, and you don't necessarily want like positive discrimination either. So I feel like being interviewed by a black person, I think it definitely makes a difference. There's a black nod, there's things that you can talk about, and there's an instant understanding, when you're talking about things. And there's a thing, do you know what I like also is that there's things that are unspoken that like, I've done this recently where I interviewed a person of color, and we were on a call and everyone else on the call was white and we were the only people of color. And sometimes there's an immediate ease where she was talking about something, so you get what I mean. It's like, I get what you mean.
We know that representation is a problem, but how can we actively change it for future generations?
I mean, I think it's going to take lots of deliberate actions. It's going to take, positive action, which is very, very different to positive discrimination, which is illegal. Positive action is encouraged by law. People don't really, if they understand it, they use the wrong language around it, because people often say, oh, I don't want to get into a situation where I'm using positive discrimination. Well, you can't. You can't give somebody a job because they're a woman or because they're black or because they're disabled. What you can do is give somebody a job who is from a protected characteristic, from an underrepresented group, when they are equally as good as the other candidate they're up against, and there has to be a decision that's got to be made. And the reason for that decision is to address the inequalities that exist and the historic marginalization of people. So I still don't think a lot of people really understand or think about that, but that is encouraged by law. And I think we've got to, just actively do more work.
Industry specifically, I think it's important for those who do have a platform to be very proactive and responsible in how they source new talent. I think people in positions of power, people who can commission new pieces, people who can make hires, should be making an active change to ensure that different viewpoints and backgrounds are represented within their own workforce. So people should be working aggressively with organizations like BComs to kind of like ensure that young Black journalists are given a platform to tell their stories on a national or international scale. Organizations should be working closely with charities like Football Beyond Borders to ensure that, young disadvantaged students are given experiences and abilities to see what careers they can achieve within the media. They should be looking to source pitches from writers of a diverse background in a very specific, real sense. And I feel like, just being proactively more aware of an editor's need to platform more diverse voices, I think is something that everyone can certainly strive to achieve and should be achieving.